Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Susan Cochran from Attitude Magazine, and today's guest, I'm very, very pleased to have her, is Melissa Orlov, who's a marriage consultant and really one of the top experts in the nation on how ADHD affects relationships. She's been writing and speaking about the topic since 2007, and she is the author of a book called The ADHD Effect on Marriage, which, by the way, was awarded the Best Psychological Book of 2010 award by Forward Reviews. Melissa writes regularly for Attitude Magazine and contributes to AttitudeMag.com. She also blogs at ADHDmarriage.com, where I think you find some interesting resources. So with that, let me turn it over to Melissa.
Oh, thank you very much, Susan. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to answering as many questions as I can. So I'm going to keep my upfront introduction to this very brief. But I wanted to start out with a few numbers to talk about how important this is as a topic, and also what sort of the typical experience is for many couples. So the reason that this is so important is that people really are not aware, for the most part, of how ADHD impacts their relationship, and yet it really does impact it greatly. The divorce rates are very high for couples in which ADHD is present and not addressed, and the rates of marital dysfunction are also very high. Both of those about double the normal population. So there's a very big problem. But most people aren't aware of the problem, and part of the reason they're not aware is that 90%, according to Russ Barkley, of adults with ADHD are still currently undiagnosed. So those of you who are on the phone here who either have a diagnosis or who have partners who have a diagnosis, you are most definitely in the minority, but you are on your way to being able to actually do something very positive for your relationship, and that's what I'll be talking about with my Q&A today. Typically, the experience is that you get into this relationship and you cannot put your finger on it, many times in part because you don't know the ADHD is there, or if you do, you're not sure that it's impacting anything. You just know that something is wrong, and it's a very frustrating experience not to know what it is or what to do about it. The good news is that the ADHD symptoms, often through what I call symptom response, where you have a symptom, even if you don't know that it's an ADHD symptom, it's still there. For example, distractibility. You have a partner who's very distracted, and so you have a symptom, and then you have a response to that symptom, and then a response to that response. And these end up creating very predictable patterns. I identify them in my book, which is called The ADHD Effect on Marriage, and talk about what they are. But you get, for example, misunderstanding. So the distractibility, to take one example, may be misinterpreted by the partner as, gee, my partner is so distracted, they're not paying any attention to me, therefore they must not love me. That's a very rational conclusion in a relationship that is not impacted by ADHD, so it doesn't surprise anyone that you go to that point. But when you have ADHD, the reality is that it's probably not true, that the partner probably is very committed to you, but they have this symptom, which is distractibility. Nonetheless, you get the symptom, you get the response to the symptom, and then the partner, who is the ADHD partner, sees that response. And often it goes from sort of confusion to, as the relationship moves further on in time, something like anger. And sometimes very significant anger. You know, why aren't you paying attention to me? What's wrong with you? Kinds of things. And that's what the spouse sees. They don't understand why they're getting that anger, and so they respond in kind, perhaps with defensiveness or anger. So there's an awful lot of misunderstanding in the relationships, and part of having the Q&A today is to help to diminish some of that misunderstanding. The patterns are, as I say, amazingly predictable, so that's very good, because what that means is as soon as you know about those patterns, you can start to interrupt the patterns and fix them and change your life, very much for the better, which is terrific. And I work as a marriage consultant. I work with couples individually, and I also give seminars for couples. I give courses for couples, and I see over and over again this very thing. They learn about the patterns, they learn about the tactics that they need to use, and then they're able to turn their relationships around, often from being separated or near divorce to being very happy. And in fact, I just posted recently an email that I got from someone who had that very experience, and I posted it not only because it was positive, though I get a lot of these kinds of emails, but also because she talked about, as a non-ADD partner, her experience in this and how she went through it and the kinds of surprises that she got, and I thought it was a very interesting one. So if you're interested, go and read that. So really what I encourage couples to do is get educated about how the ADHD symptoms impact their relationships, what the common responses are to the ADHD symptoms, and the reason for that is because it isn't just ADHD that is impacting the relationship. Very much it is the responses as well. So you can't just be in a relationship, and in fact one mistake couples make is that they blame the ADHD partner because that is the person who happens to have those symptoms. But it takes two people to make these relationships difficult, and so you really need to understand not only the symptoms but also those responses to the symptoms and how those interactions go. So there are patterns, what it looks like in the relationship. In the book, I talk about 6 steps that you go through, and I have them in a specific order because I think that in order, for example, to overcome fear and hopelessness and some of the obstacle emotions in step 2, you have to have a better understanding and empathy for your partner. You're quite different, much more different physiologically as well as in the experiences you've had as kids. And so you really need to better understand each other first. And a good way to do that is through either certain kinds of conversations you would have with your partner, which I introduce you to, or reading about it, like on the Attitude website. You can read questions that people have or articles about what it's like to be have ADHD or what you do about ADHD, and also the non-ADD partner. There are an awful lot of non-ADD partners in my forum who talk about their difficulties that they have. Hard to read sometimes, a lot of pain there, but important also to understand. So gaining empathy is the first step. The second is getting past obstacle emotions, anger being a big one, and I talk about how to do that. Getting good treatment not only for the ADHD partner, but also sometimes for the non-ADHD partner, if that's the combination you have, or if you have 2 ADHD partners, for both of you, making sure that that treatment gives you good coverage and is multimodal, not just medication, but other things as well. And then learning good communication tools that take ADHD into account. Again, people who have ADHD in their relationships have slightly different, actually quite different, kinds of challenges that they face from people who don't have it. So you need to learn specific communication techniques, how to make sure that you keep your boundaries intact between the two of you and that you don't end up with one partner who dominates. Typically that would be a non-ADHD partner, one partner who doesn't, who sort of takes orders or is constantly messing up or whatever because of ADHD symptoms that haven't been totally addressed. So there are 6 specific steps. The last one's always the fun one, the romance and the connection. But you have to get some of those other things out of the way first. You can't start there because obviously if you're really angry and you're still working on those obstacle emotions, it's going to be very difficult to find romance. So what I will stop with before I start taking questions, because that's the point today is for me to answer your questions, is just to say you really can thrive. I see it over and over again. It is a matter of understanding what's going on, getting yourself well educated, learning the subtleties and the sometimes not so subtleties of these 12 patterns and how to interrupt them, and then learning a very specific skill set together. And I know one of the questions I'm sure I'll get is going to be about, well, how do we get both partners completely involved in this process? So I will open it up. I think, Susan, you're the one who's going to be funneling questions my way.
I've got lots of questions for you, Melissa. Okay, let's start with one Well, two questions. A question from two different people that I'll combine because they're similar. One is from David, and one is from a question posted to the website. David says, could you comment on communication problems in emotionally committed relationships where one or both persons have ADHD? In what major ways does ADHD impair interpersonal communications? Maybe the top 3 ways, if you could name those. And what are some ways we can remedy those problems? In a similar vein, another person posts that my husband and I both have ADHD. His is classic hyperactive and mine's inattentive. We have very significant communication issues. Do you have any suggestions for us?
Okay, so let me start with 3 significant issues that couples often run into with communication problems when ADHD is present, particularly when you're in the stage that I'm going to assume most or all of you are in, which is that you have not yet figured out how to control this. So there is, and when I say this, I mean how the two of you are interacting. The first one is distractibility. So distraction obviously means that you're not going to be attending to each other so well. Another one is defensiveness and anger. So that really will get in the way of good communication, and that takes a number of different ways of showing up. Sometimes it's impulsivity, sometimes it's anger of not being heard or whatever. And then the third way that ADHD symptoms can impair, I would say, would be with misunderstandings and misinterpretations. So you don't understand the way that your partner's brain works as well as you could, and so you misunderstand their motivation lots of times in terms of what's going on and why they're doing something they're going to do. So I will talk briefly to each of those 3. And then talk a little bit on, Susan, I may have to have you remind me if I don't get to the second part of the question, bring me around to it again. So let me talk to distractibility a little bit. This is the #1 symptom of adult ADHD and in terms of frequency, and it's really difficult in conversations. So you might have a partner who you're talking with that partner, and then the ADHD partner loses track of the conversation because they get distracted and therefore can't keep up with it, or you can't get them to the conversation in the first place because they're so distracted by other things that you never get around to talking about important issues. I'll take those 2 examples. There are other ways that distractibility gets into it. So in both of those situations, the approach to take to that would be to work with your doctor, as that would be a key target symptom for that needs to be treated. That's a treatment issue first and foremost. And so some people choose medication. Others choose other things like memory training. CogMed, for example, is a very good program for improving memory and focus. And medication, of course, helps many people. The estimate is 70 to 80% of people can see very, very significant results with medication once they figure out which one to take. So that's the sort of starting point. Then there are other things that you can do, for example, types of cues. I'll give you one example of a verbal cue. If you have a partner who is constantly distracted from a conversation that you're having and sort of zones out for a little while, and then comes back, that partner should be able and have permission to, and it should be viewed as a positive thing by both people, that they would say, gee, I zoned out there for a moment. Can you repeat what you just said? And bring themselves then back fully into the conversation. The mistake that you make sometimes is that the ADHD partner might be embarrassed that they zoned out and not say that, so they sort of glue together what they think might have happened, and they often guess wrong, and then that ends up being a frustrating conversation because the ADHD partner doesn't really fully understand what's going on, and the non-ADHD partner feels unheard and not listened to well. So that's one specific tactic for a specific type of distractibility. The other kind of distraction, which is very difficult to manage sometimes, is just that you don't manage to get together in conversations to make them happen, or also with sex. Another thing where you're distracted from initiating the conversation or the intimate time together so often that you sort of give up. The non-ADHD partner gets tired of pursuing a distracted ADHD partner, and so important things never get taken care of. A way to get around that particular issue is to create blocks of time where you schedule literally blocks of time to attend to each other and to be able to clear away things that are less distracting. So if you have difficulty finding time to talk about difficult topics, for example, because one partner is very distracted, you might say every Saturday afternoon we're going to walk for an hour. Walking happens to be very good for calming the ADHD mind, and also you're away from the home and away from a lot of distractions that might happen. And so it happens to be a very good tactic for finding time to talk to each other. And you have to schedule it, otherwise you have the same problem. You're both very distracted. So that's one way that a specific symptom impacts communication. Another is defensive-ness and anger, and what we often see is chronic anger in a relationship with ADHD and non-ADHD partners combined. There are a whole bunch of reasons for that. This is like this is a 2-hour topic, but the most important of them is the sense for the non-ADD partner that they're not in control of their life, that the ADHD symptoms impose problems for them with the inconsistency, typically, of an ADHD partner. And so the non-ADD partner has no control over their life, and they grow very resentful of the surprises that drop into their laps. This makes them very angry. They lose patience with the ADHD partner's struggles, and so respond negatively. The ADHD partner ends up then being on the defensive with the, gee, I can't do anything right, why should I try? I don't really want to talk to you because I know you're going to blast me. I did something wrong, so I'm going to maybe cover it up. It becomes a big communication issue around the defensiveness and anger. The anger response from the non-ADHD partner then triggers another response, as I was talking about the symptom response thing, a series of sort of retreat responses, or, gee, I'm going to fight fire with fire and be angry at you so that maybe I can get you to back off, kind of thing. So that's a huge communication problem. The way to get around that is it's a little complex. Obviously, it's more than a little complex. There are a number of different approaches you have to take to get around chronic anger. One of them is that that the ADHD has to be treated so that the ADHD partner is less disorganized and more reliable. Reliability is a big, big issue for the non-ADHD partner, and is part of what's triggering the anger. At the same time, the non-ADHD partner needs to take responsibility for taking control of their own life again. This is tricky because the ADHD symptoms, unless they're being treated, are hard to manage for them. But one of the chief ways of getting rid of your own anger is to take better control of your life. So there are a whole bunch of tactics that you go through to do that. And then there are specific kinds of conversational techniques that you can use that are difficult to escalate into anger. One of which is one of my favorites, is called a learning conversation. That's a structured conversation where you have a speaker and a listener, and it's a certain kind of conversation. I talk about that in my book, and again, I could take forever on that, but then I won't get to anybody else's questions. The last one I talked about was the misunderstanding motivation. Again, that's about learning about more about your partner, how their mind works. When you misunderstand distractibility and you interpret it as my partner doesn't love me anymore, that has huge, huge impacts for the relationship as a whole, because obviously that's right at the core of why you got married in the first place. And that leads to a whole bunch of miscommunications, misunderstandings, and bad kinds of communication. All right, that's kind of a long answer, but thorough.
No, I think that's super helpful. Thank you. I'm going to switch to a question very different now about house. This will not be, I'm sure, unfamiliar to you. These questions, similar questions, are from two women with ADHD, ADD, from Anne Marie. How do you convince your spouse that your forgetfulness and disorganization are not intentional and they don't indicate a lack of concern for things that are important to the spouse, i.e., capital letters, cleaning house? And a second person says, my husband's very supportive of me and the fact that I have ADD, but he's way too hard on me in doing the details in housework. I just can't keep up with it all. Any suggestions for how to bring this up without making it sound like I'm using it as an excuse? He's a perfectionist, and I'm struggling just with the basics of housework. So we're pretty far apart in terms of our standards about the house.
Okay. I'm going to start with the second one and then move to the first. I would say, since there's such a big difference between the two members of this particular couple, that you're probably not going to end up on either person's ideal spot. And a good solution for you might be to hire some help, just to acknowledge. And delegating is perfectly okay, and that's what this is. It's a form of delegation. Acknowledge that since it's really, really, really hard for you and you really can't feel like you can keep up, let somebody else do it if it's not one of your strengths. And that will then meet somewhere in the middle. It may not be perfect, but it will be a lot more clean and it won't be as stressful for you anymore. And if he's really supportive, I suspect that will go over well. And I've had couples, many couples dealing with household issues, and it's amazing what a relief it is when you hire it out. Then the question of, how do I convince my spouse that it's not intentional, i.e. cleaning? That's actually kind of a tricky question because it implies that the spouse thinks that you're using ADHD as an excuse. And ADHD is, you may have heard this before, it's a reason, but it's not an excuse. So it's a reason that things have happened a certain way in the past, but probably not an excuse for them to continue, at least within a reasonable framework into the future. So probably it's a twofold thing that you have to do there. First is help them understand ADHD better. There are ways to, books and different things you can do to get a clearer understanding of really that ADHD is not a willful choice, but rather it is the result of biology, the chemistry of the brain, and how the brain takes in information and what it does with it. And also, most non-ADHD partners that I see are willing to bend and talk with you about what will work, as long as they see a convincing attempt on your part to address and hear their issues. And so in the cleaning thing, it may be that one thing that would help this particular person would be a conversation which says, I hear you completely. I agree with you. The house is really messy. I mean, if you're denying, no, the house, it's okay. The house is just fine this way. Why are you so picky? What you're doing is not acknowledging the legitimacy of the fact that this person has a problem with this. The first thing you need to do is acknowledge their point of view, that you hear it, that you're concerned about it because it's their point of view. And then tell them what it is you're doing about it. So just like the second person that I said, hire a housekeeper and you'll probably get rid of much of this particular problem. There are a bunch of things you could do. So it isn't personal. ADHD is definitely not personal. That's the educational part. But another important part is, okay, so you have a cleaning problem. What are you going to do about the cleaning problem? The ADHD isn't an excuse to continue to have the cleaning problem if it's genuinely a problem. If you're walking over everything to get through your house and you can't invite people to your home because it's too messy, then it's a problem and it's getting in the way. And so the next thing is, okay, so you have ADD, fine, but how are you going to address that concern? So make sure you acknowledge that legitimacy of the concern and then address it. If you say, look, I'm just not capable of doing it, I'm not willing to do anything about it, maybe you need to do something about it, that's one possible response. It probably won't be a popular one because the non-ADHD partner will be saying, hey, I get to pick up a lot of the slack here and I'm not going to do it, some more. But it's one option.
To that point, I have seen a number of posts, on Attitude over the years of non-ADHD spouses who were absolutely furious and angry at their spouse for just what you're describing, sort of using ADD as an excuse. And oftentimes they're not angry that the spouse has ADD or ADHD. They're just angry that they're not taking any steps to deal with it or to make any changes. That's what you're describing here, I guess.
Yeah, and sometimes I actually run into the situation where the ADHD partner will tell me, I really am taking steps. For example, I'm taking medication and I'm doing a lot of things, and my partner doesn't see that stuff. Sometimes that's because they tend to take it during the workday, and what the partner gets is the edges of the day. They get the morning, and they get the evening, and they get the weekends when the medication is not actually enforced. So they see the non-treated part of it. But also, things that are happening inside the brain of the ADHD person may or may not impact what the experience is of the non-ADHD partner or of the other ADHD partner. So you might feel more focused, but until you apply that focus to the behaviors that are in the interactions that the non-ADHD partner or other partner experiences, it's meaningless to them. The rubber hits the road with the specific behaviors. I talk a lot about the importance of measuring what's going on so that you're not having an argument over whether or not it's enough. You have an objective look at, yes, the house did get cleaned up 5 out of 7 days, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be 7 days. Or, who did it? How much did each person do or whatever. I talk about a lot about how you measure something objectively and then figure out how to solve the problem.
It's interesting that the wives of ADD are the ones who are saying, I should be doing a better job of cleaning. We don't see many cases where they're asking their husband to chip in. And here is one from PJ where she says, I'm the wife with ADD. I ask my husband to help and assist with household challenges, but he does so in what I feel is a condescending manner. However, he gets so frustrating at constantly having to repeat himself. How do we find a happy medium? So she's feeling that she has to ask for help and feeling resentment and condescension from her partner.
Right. So I would say I would set up a structure. So what they have sounds to me like they don't have a set structure in place where, so she's constantly, sounds like, asking for help. So instead, go through, do an assessment of who's doing what, how long it takes, how well it fits with their specific strengths and weaknesses. I can't tell you how many couples I have where they say, okay, the male ADHD spouse ought to go pay the bills even though he has no ability to do this at all, just because they think the guys should be doing this, No. Look at your specific weaknesses and strengths for each person and try to allocate the chores that way. But make the chores discrete so that you have a person who's responsible for, let's say the laundry and the dishes and the yard care or paying the bills or whatever those things are. Figure out how many hours they take. And it will take an ADHD person typically more hours to do the same thing because they have to also, not only do they have to do the chore, but they also have to organize in their own mind how to do the chore. And that just takes time and effort. So it's not each partner does it in the same amount of time, and you shouldn't expect that they will. But anyway, so and then when they have their own responsibilities and those are clearly delineated, it will be easier to see whether they've set up a good system. So that's a much better way. Each person has their own responsibilities. Than the constant, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? Going in both directions, right? Why aren't you doing more? Question. You've already settled that, and so you don't have to go through that over and over again.
Well, here's a variation on this theme from Brandy. She says, my husband and I both have ADHD. One of our main conflicts is that even though we're both on medication for ADHD, I'm still carrying the load of our lives. I'm very motivated and driven sometimes to perfectionist tendencies, but he's very unmotivated, and I have to push him on almost everything else, especially when it comes to job search. She says he wants a career change, and what is the best way to work on this? I guess she's asking, the two things that she would like to see him change is job search and to keep up with her children's activities. And she feels that she's doing all the pushing in this regard.
Yeah. Okay, so this is one of these situations where I'm guessing that actually he may not be unmotivated. He may actually wish that he could do this stuff, but he may not have the right kinds of structures in place to allow him to do that. So, for example, he may be taking medication, but that might be all he's done, and he hasn't done the kind of behavioral therapy or other kinds of things that he would need to do to get himself well enough organized to attack some of this stuff. So, for example, he may not have reminders in place like audible reminders or a good calendar system or a good way of thinking about how to manage his time. A lot of people who have time problems with ADD don't understand the concept or haven't thought about the concept of transitions and how long it actually takes them to transition between things and how to incorporate that into their lives. So when she says he's unmotivated, there's almost like a judging thing going on there, which is probably demotivating to him to hear her say that. So I'd be very careful about making the assumption that he's unmotivated rather than that he doesn't have the structures in place yet to act upon the things that he would like to be able to do. So that's the first comment I have on that. And she may also make the assumption, again, I don't know this, that because they both have ADHD, that he's going to respond to treatment the same way that she does, and that may well not be the case. People respond to treatments quite differently and need different kinds of treatments, even within the same family, to be able to function well. So he may be under managing his ADHD, and that's why he's struggling more than she is, rather than it's a lack of motivation. This is a very serious problem. Even though they both have ADHD, you still have one person who's dominant and who is sort of running things and in control. Typically what will happen then is that the less dominant spouse sort of retreats and pulls away and becomes resentful but tends not to express it quite so well. And so that's a negative thing. I think that this couple probably needs a professional person who understands ADHD or maybe a coach for him to help him put some structures in place that will help him work through this.
Okay. Here's a sort of a segue, a similar but different from Rachel. My husband has ADHD. In this case, it's just us, her husband. She says, when I'm out for the evening, he will not put our sons in bed on time. Our youngest has a bedtime routine, which my husband refuses to do. He just lets him fall asleep on the couch so he doesn't have to get up, read him a story, and put him to bed. I don't understand why he won't do these things. Is this related to his ADHD or what? So here's a similar.
Okay. The answer to that is might be.
What's the story here? You know? Right.
I'm guessing that it's a couple of things. I'm guessing that he may not be completely on board with what the schedule is that she has put in place for the child. That he feels it's less important than she does for him for that child to be specifically put into a specific schedule. I'm guessing that's one thing. So there's not complete agreement, and he's being told what to do. I think there's probably also a power struggle going on here, as in, can you tell me what to do or not? And I see that a lot. Almost all of the couples that I work with have some sort of power struggle going on between a non-ADD and an ADD partner over whose way is right and who's the boss of whom. And so there may be a little bit of resistance there because of a power struggle. And then the third thing may be that he gets distracted and doesn't, or loses track of time or something. There's an ADHD symptom that does get in the way of his getting up to do it. She's interpreting it as he's too lazy to get up and go and read. And again, that's a sort of a moral interpretation of what is likely to be ADHD symptoms. And I try to move couples away from those moral interpretations. Don't assume you understand the motivation of the person you're married to. In fact, you should assume the opposite, that you don't understand the motivation, and ask them about it. And what you might find if there's an open environment is he might say, I just keep getting distracted. I start watching a movie and suddenly it's 10 and the kid's already asleep and I haven't noticed it. So that may be a symptom.
Well, here's Tracy. again, the non-ADHD spouse, my husband has severe ADHD. He can't sit down to watch TV. He can't go to the movies. Going out to dinner with him on a date is practically impossible. And when I talk to him, I have to repeat myself and redirect him. How do we maintain intimacy as far as friendship, partnership, and our relationship if he can't sit still long enough to engage with me more than 5 minutes?
Okay, so he's got the H in the ADHD.
Right, he's got the H. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you get to really severe ADHD, I strongly recommend professional help. She cannot organize him. It won't work. It's not conducive to a good marital relationship for her to be the person who's teaching him what to do or who's doing the research or whatever. So he needs professional help other than her. Either a really good coach is probably a good way to start, and also a really good doctor that helps him with the treatment. Again, good treatment is multimodal. I talk in my book about sort of 3 different legs and how to think about them and how to apply that to your treatment. I won't go into it here, but if it's that severe, he needs professional help immediately.
Clearly,
and she needs to stand back enough. Encourage him to get it. And again, I get this question. Okay, he needs help getting himself organized, and he needs to call the doctor, but he can't get himself organized enough to call the doctor, right? At which point I say, okay, fine, it's in both of your best interests. If you have his permission to do it, if he's willing to, include you in this, go ahead and schedule those appointments, or the first one at least, to get him going. That's just in your best interests, not to stand on ceremony.
Right. I guess here's a bit of a next step to that question from Sandy. What do you do if your spouse is in denial about their ADHD or just says they're fine the way they are?
Okay. I'm very happy that question was asked, actually. I tell people it is not ADHD that causes divorce. It's not. ADHD is manageable and treatable for the vast majority of people who have it. It takes time and it takes effort, but it is manageable. Denial, on the other hand, causes divorce. So this is a really problematic situation that you're finding yourself in if your partner is in denial. And by the way, it's often both partners that are in denial in their own way. So one of the reasons, so there are a whole bunch of different ways to get a partner out of denial. Typically, the spouse can't do it because the spouse sometimes is part of the reason they're in denial. If you have a situation, which is very common, where you have an ADHD partner who has unmanaged ADHD and a non-ADHD partner who is madder than a wet hen, that partner hasn't treated it yet, what you end up with is chronic anger, making the ADHD partner even more resistant. And the thinking there is, look, if I admit that I have ADHD or if I admit that the ADHD is a problem, I'm essentially saying that I am the reason that we are nearing divorce. And I don't want to do that. So I'm not going to. I'm just going to tell you. And furthermore, what I see is how angry you are. And let me tell you, if you would just be nicer to me, everything would be fine. Right? So they interact with each other, and so that's one of the reasons why the either hopelessness or you're not meeting my expectations, even if you're not angry, just this sort of you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing kind of thing, can mean that the non-ADD partner cannot be the one who pushes this. So the other ways to do this, get your partner to read my book. The first part of the book, this sounds self-serving, and I don't mean it to, but there aren't a lot of these resources out there. The first part of the book describes what a relationship looks like when ADHD is impacting it. And I hear people say to me all the time, what, were you sitting in my living room? How do you know this stuff? Because they relate to it so well. So that's one option. Another is I have, as I mentioned, this seminar. The seminar is designed specifically to get both members of the couple past their denial and move them to a point where they're both working into it, and then give them some some tools to work through things. What you'll find is that typically a non-ADHD partner doesn't think they're in denial about the role that their own anger plays and their own actions and responses plays. But when you start to confront them, in fact, that they're able to confront that. So it's usually both people who have denial problems. And so those are two very good resources. Another is a doctor or a therapist or a professional. Again, a third party really needs to start working on this. Now, that's hard. If a person says, look, my ADHD doesn't matter, I'm not willing to go to a therapist because it doesn't matter, then you're back to square one, reading my book or listening to an audio. I've told some people, look, put it on a CD, the audio book on a CD, go on a long trip somewhere, and just throw it in and say, I wanted to hear this. And then, all you have to do is get through the first part, and then maybe it turns, it at least opens up the conversation.
Well, that's interesting, yeah. Well, speaking about divorce, there are a couple of people here who seem on the verge of divorce. One person, Meg, my husband has dyslexia and ADD, although he does not believe he has ADD. I mentioned that we have a mother-child relationship, and he's now threatening divorce. What do you suggest? Another person, my spouse called me selfish and accused me of always doing what I wanted for years. Then I was diagnosed at age 49, and although she seemed very understanding at first when medications didn't seem to work for me, she's now chosen to file for divorce. What does it take for a spouse to accept rather than just understand the idea of the ADHD spouse?
You're not going to like the response.
This is not going to be good.
Yeah, no. Okay, so what it takes the panacea of, love me the way I am isn't going to happen. And it's not that, so there's the core person that is the important part of who you are as a person. And then there are the symptoms which surround the core person and get in the way of that core person expressing themselves. So you got married to somebody, they loved your core person, but then as the infatuation wore off and as the marriage went on further and further, the symptoms got more and more in the way, and these patterns that develop get worse and worse and worse as they go through. So your job, the ADHD partner, it really, you get diagnosed. If the medication isn't working for you, to talk to the second person first, what's the experience of the non-ADD partner is that nothing has changed. So you've tried one thing and nothing has changed. That means that you need to try some other things. It is the ADHD partner's responsibility to take care of pushing for really excellent treatment for the ADHD as hard as they can, and at least in the point of view of the non-ADD partner that they're with, as fast as they can. If that doesn't work, try coaching, try fish oil, try exercise, try sleep changes, try nutrition changes. There are all these things that can impact how whether the ADHD symptoms express themselves. Medication is just one of a huge tool set. That's the first thing. So that's the way. If you want your partner to stay with you, you need to demonstrate that you're taking that treatment seriously and not just saying, hey, look, I've tried it and now this is who I'm going to be. Because this is who I'm going to be, that's the status quo. And up to this point, the status quo hasn't worked.
Right.
And it's just the symptom.
So this person added a secondary comment subsequently saying, well, and my wife had never bothered to even read ADHD material. So again,
right, because you get
he's expecting her to make the adjustment.
Right. So, and the ADHD person's never, the non-ADD person's never read the material. Is that that's this is your problem. You take care of it. I don't want to have anything to do with you until you do. That's not the right attitude either. That attitude is very unhelpful. At least supportiveness would be great. But the reality is your partner can't do these things for you. The ADHD partner must do it. Because it's their body. While you dislike the attitude of, look, I'm not going to do anything for you and I'm not going to support you further until you get your act together, that the reality of that particular relationship is that's what you got to deal with. And so you have to really go after the ADHD. The dyslexia and ADD, the threatening divorce, is that person hasn't gotten the diagnosis of ADHD yet, so there's a guess that's going on. That's in a different place. Again, sometimes people threaten divorce because you need to up the ante enough so that somebody's paying attention. That's the thought there. Probably it needs to be a gentler conversation around, look, I suspect you have ADHD. If you do, that's wonderful news, because that means you can learn about these patterns, you can learn about what to do, and we can turn things around together. And I really would look forward to doing that with you, but first you have to know that you have the ADHD or not. So you go get the evaluation, and if it turns out you don't have ADHD, then you have a different problem to solve.
Right, right.
And so you don't have to guess anymore.
Right. Here's a very poignant, sort of a sweet question from M. My ADHD partner is working on a business plan that requires financing from a friend. He's been working on it for 3 years. My partner is very focused and positive that will all work out. I think that it's not going to work out. How do I continue to support him in his dream? Is it important to be positive, or do I tell him that he's dreaming and his partner's never going to come through with the financing?
Okay, that's a tough one. Okay, some of that depends upon their financial situation and whether they have the wiggle room financially to allow him to follow his dreams and not end up on the street. So let me assume that they do have the finance, since they didn't mention it, that they do have the financial wherewithal to do that. At that point, then, it might be some constructive conversations around, are there ways to get some interim check-ins from other people? Maybe you don't have to have the entire business plan done, but you can have some preliminary conversations or something and get input from other people, which would be a standard business way of making sure you're on track before you put all your eggs into a specific basket. And make sure you're not spending money against it, I guess I would say, so don't take out a huge loan for a business plan that you don't think is going to work. That kind of thing. Be practical about letting them pursue the dreams if you can afford to do so without getting too much in their way. That's a really tough question, because you'd be pretty offended if somebody came in and started telling you how to do your work. But if it impacts the finances of the family, it's a very relevant question.
Right,
it may not be. Maybe an accountant would be a good person to talk to, or something on that one. I'm not sure.
Again, this idea of bringing in an outsider.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the local entrepreneurial group where you run the business plan in a presentation by them at their monthly meeting or something. I don't know, but idea generation around how do you get the third-party business review so it's not coming from you.
Right, exactly. So a couple of questions about irritability and sort of anger and irritability on the side of the ADD person. Veronica says, I've never been actually diagnosed, but I look back at my childhood and all the ADD symptoms are there. Now as an adult, my biggest problem is my anger and irritability toward everyone. What can I do to stop being so short-tempered? And in a similar one, a parent posts that my adult ADHD son has been dating a wonderful girl on and off for 5 years since high school. He's always been short on patience, quote, with me, but now I've seen the same attitude and lack of appreciation and rudeness creeping into his relationship with her. He seems to have a very difficult time listening, gets very annoyed. His girlfriend asked me, is this part of his ADHD? I'm concerned that he may not have the skills to maintain a long-term relationship because of his irritability and anger.
Okay, so she doesn't say whether he's being treated or not, which would
no, she doesn't. Neither case did the quote irritable and angry people mention treatment. No.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the first place I would go, actually, with these two particular questions, which is to better understand the treatment. Irritability and emotionality. So there is research to suggest that many people with ADHD respond to things emotionally more quickly than people without ADHD, and so it can be part of ADHD. Irritability can also mean that you have what Ned Hallwell calls lack of breaks. There's an impulsivity component, again, that could be treated, where you're just not taking a few seconds to consider what you're going to say before you say it. You're just blurting out whatever comes at you, and it happens to be negative. So I have seen a number of people who had irritability problems with their ADHD start a medication regimen that got rid of that irritability. In fact, my husband is one of them, and his irritability is gone. I mean, it's not like it was partially there. It went from these spurts of unbelievable, completely unexpected anger to none. He just is very even-keeled now, which is really great for our marriage. So sometimes that can be treated medicinally. Sometimes it has to be treated with specific types of ways of being able to learn how to wait, and that would be more on the brain training side of things, or the cogmed side of things, or sometimes neurofeedback kinds of things. So some of those treatments, cogmed has been shown in research to work well. Neurofeedback they're still on the fence about it, but and then there are certain kinds of verbal cues you can use. It's a little harder when somebody's irritable or lacks patience. I suspect in the second case that the girlfriend's going to that's going to be self-correcting, and maybe she's going to leave the relationship.
Right. We have 2 or 3 questions here about, one is, does ADD cause libido problems? The second one is, how can we, the anger and difficulties in our marriage have caused our romantic relationships to really disintegrate. What can we do to get those back on track? So there are a couple of questions here about the romantic side of life in an ADHD partnership. Any comments on that?
All right. So let me talk about libido first. Russ Barkley and Kevin Murphy did some research which suggests that a larger proportion of at least the group that they were talking about, which at that point was late 20s when they were measuring this, did have less sex drive than others. But it's still not the majority of people. So it's possible that libido issues can be associated with ADHD. Libido issues can also be associated with some ADHD treatments. In particular, I'm thinking antidepressants, which can diminish libido. It also is not very sexy when your partner is yelling at you all the time or coming after you all the time, and so that can also result in libido issues. And also, if you are a woman who has gone through menopause, that one of the side effects of that, which is unrelated to ADHD, can be libido issues. So there are all sorts of reasons why there might be libido issues, and depending upon which of those you have, you'd have a different approach. If the medication is the issue, then you might try a different kind of medication, for example. One of the things that romance and sex researchers suggest is that you have sex anyway if you don't have other problems like anger issues or whatever, because the chemistry of having sex connects you and makes you more interested in having sex. So extend out your foreplay if you can, so that you just take longer and you ignore the fact. You say, hey, it's a great thing to get connected. We know that after the fact we'll feel more connected, so let's just ignore the fact that we're not feeling so really excited right now, and see if just having sex helps you in that. So there are. I work with an awful lot of couples who have really struggled a lot with their sex lives because these relationships. I mean, when you have almost 60% of them as clinically dysfunctional. Which is a huge number. Of course, your sex life is going to be problematic, and I work with a fair number of couples who have no sex in their relationship at all. Unfortunately, you have to get at a lot of that through getting. That's why I set up these 6 steps. You have to do the empathy and getting rid of the anger well before you can get back into feeling romantic about each other, just as sort of a matter of course. So that you do have to go through the feeling confident in each other again, feeling like there's trust in the relationship, which is dependent upon feeling reliable, and et cetera. Anger, without a doubt, helps romance disintegrate. So does parent-child, and often those two things are very connected. If you're in a parent-child dynamic, and many of you are, that's very unsexy. Who wants to have sex with their parent? I mean, nobody. So, and so it's one of the best reasons to get out of that dynamic as fast as possible. And one of the major symptoms, if you want to call it that, behaviors of that, is nagging. And I urge people to think of nagging differently, not as something that you're forced to do because your partner is not doing what they're supposed to do, but as a choice. There are other ways to get at the partner doing things more consistently. In fact, there are a lot better ways. Nagging is the worst possible choice. It's the choice most people make, but it isn't the best choice. The best choice is to treat the ADHD, get the structures in place. It's a longer process, but a much more effective and much longer-term one, and it doesn't impact your sex life in a negative way.
Right. That's yeah. Okay. Here's someone who says, Melissa, directed to you, I loved your book. I read it. It changed the way I treated and reacted to my husband who has ADHD, and I've recommended it to many friends. So there's a tribute.
Yay, thank you.
I can't get my husband to read your book. So, I think you answered this question with a really great suggestion of popping it into the CD player on a long trip. So how can I make it fun and exciting for him to read it? It sounds as if he responded positively to his spouse's discussions after having read the book. And then finally, how do I get his family to understand more about ADHD? They treat him like a goofball, like the goofball of the family. They don't take him seriously, and it's hurtful to both of us.
Yeah. So a couple of different things. On the second one, they may treat him like a goofball because he's not very consistent. So the more reliable he becomes, the more they may stand back and say, hey, wow, he actually is getting his act together here. They may or may not understand the reason why, but that may help with that. And he probably can go to them and say, hey, it offends me, it hurts me that you treat me this way. And I want you to stop and to start thinking about it. And if they have a good relationship, they will take that to heart, and if he brings it to their attention. So he doesn't have to put up with that. He can throw up some rules for those relationships. As far as fun ways to get into the book, one of the things that I've had several people report to me is that they had a partner who couldn't get into it, and so they read it together. Where the non-ADD partner, they read small sections and they talk about it. And that's actually a good way to open up the conversation, as long as it's done in a very safe way. I'm not forcing you to do this, but hey, let's explore this together.
That's a great suggestion. Well, we're pretty much out of time. This has been really, really, really helpful, Melissa. Great answers, and I'm sure that everyone found it very helpful. Is there any final words you would like to say?
Well, I mean, I always
about 400 people online here.
I always like to just finish up on a very positive note. These are huge struggles, and most of you are in the place that I used to be in, which is my husband and I had decided to separate and get divorced before we figured this out. And now we've turned things around, and we're, as I like to say, ridiculously happy, which always makes everybody laugh. But it's a good place to be. And you can be that. You can get there too. Not everybody gets to that place, but a whole lot more people than you would expect turn their relationships around when they really start to delve into this and think about it. It's just really, it's wonderful. You can thrive together, and you can get these things out of your relationship. You cannot do it alone. You have to do it together, and some of that takes a while. But you can thrive, and I encourage everybody to pursue it.
That's wonderful. It's a great way to look at it, and it's a great story. Thanks again, Melissa. We really appreciate your spending the time, and goodbye, everybody.
For more Attitude Podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.